we have demonstrated to the world that we're not reliable. You can't trust us. With a stroke of a pen, banks in New York City and elsewhere in the United States can essentially deprive you of your funds. That's a very, very dangerous thing to do. So releasing funds, I'm in favor of it, 100%. We ought to end this practice of arbitrarily barring access to funds from foreign countries that we don't like for whatever particular reason. So on that point, I totally disagree with the people in Washington and their thinking. But then again, I want to live in a different world from the one they're happy with. I don't want to live in a state of unrelenting conflict with people when there's no reason for it. I want to be able to do business with everybody. I keep saying that, and people look at me, what do you mean? I mean exactly what I say. We want commerce. Now, we need to structure that in a way that's mutually beneficial. There are ways to do that without necessarily sanctioning everybody. That's part of it. The second part is that you could be right, that in the final analysis, he can't achieve everything and he may have to walk away. But what does walk away mean? Are you going to walk away from the enormous amounts of money that you pour into Israel on a routine basis? That's the question. Everyone on the Hill will stand up and say, oh, you can't do that. Which means if Israel has access to unending funding for whatever it wants to do, its behavior will not change. If you're trying to affect a change in behavior with Israel, you have to address the funding issue.
And I guess we'll find out if that's going to happen. I guess the next thing we're going to wait to see is when Trump finally rolls that out, and then we'll be able to say no longer this is leaked or that. But here's what he said, and then we can look at it. But Trump is not only in the news today because of this. Trump is also in the G7 here. And I just want to pop this up in here because Zelensky is also there. Again, I don't know why. But Zelensky says the G7 agreed Russia is not winning the war and discussed more sanctions. What do you make about Trump's issue there and about whether or not more sanctions is going to help?
I think President Trump has realized that he's a gargantuan liar. The war is lost. There's no chance for Ukraine in any way, shape, or form militarily to overcome the Russians. I think he knows that. I think he also senses that this is a trip backward in time. It's sort of like going to the Natural History Museum. Who is the G7? They're not necessarily the big movers and shakers they once were. The world has changed a great deal. And you talk about the Japanese. The Japanese are in a very difficult position, and they've made it abundantly clear to us, if you are going to demand that or try to prevent us from having access to Russian oil that we need right now in Japan, well, we'll just sell off the rest of your debt. This is, we have a bond market that's very fragile. You turn on, the analysts, pick your analyst, whoever it is, from Ray Dalio to Luke Groman to Grundlach, any number of them. They'll all come back to the same thing. What's the bond market doing? Because that's been the bellwether for so much in our history. And many of these European states, they have one foot in the financial grave right now. I mean, imagine Starmer showing up for a thing like this. He has about as much credibility as Al Capone. Forget it. So I think President Trump is sort of surveying everything. I think he sort of intuitively grasps some of this. How much, I can't tell you, but I think he gets it. I think he understands this is the past, not the future. And I think he understands that's also true in the Middle East. You can only fight the future so long. And eventually, if you continue to fight it, you will be destroyed by it.
Now, let me ask you this question on the Russia-Ukraine war itself. Obviously, President Trump comes into office and says, yep, I'm going to have this done. We're going to knock it out in one day. And then it was 100 days and ad infinitum. And now here 17 months later, he's basically saying, yeah, I'm washing my hands of it, not doing anything. The day before he left for the G7, it didn't get much press here because so many other things were going on. But Vladimir Putin initiated a phone call, and they talked for about an hour. And Putin was bringing up ways he thought he could try and bring about an end to this. And I think that he did that ahead. It was ostensibly to wish Trump a happy birthday, but it was ahead of the G7. And then you can see the headlines from today. It doesn't seem that released a lot because it says Trump signals swift return to sanctions on Russian oil as G7 refocuses on Ukraine. And, the whole deal again, this is I remember, Doug, you and I were talking this well over a year ago, that we keep the Europeans keep going back to that sanctions. The first 18 rounds didn't do anything, and then they came with that round number 19. That was going to do it. Then 20, that wasn't going to do it. And now here 21, they're trying to do another one. I mean, at what point do they just have to see this is just continue to saw off the limb that they're standing on?
FDR at the end of the Potsdam Conference was in pretty bad shape, and it wasn't long before he died. And he was talking to the admiral who functioned as his senior military advisor and also effectively as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And the admiral said to President Roosevelt, Mr. President, these agreements that you've signed with the Soviets, nobody believes that the Soviets will ever honor those agreements. Nobody believes that this is good for the West or for the United States and our allies. And he finally, this is Admiral Leahy, and he finally turned to Admiral Leahy and he said, I know, but I'm just too damn tired to fight anymore. And of course, not long thereafter, he passed away. He was tired. He shouldn't have been president. He should never have had that last term. There's nothing we can do about that. I don't know where President Trump is. I think President Trump is focused very narrowly right now in the Middle East. If he can make some success out of it, perhaps he will then turn his attention back to Ukraine. But for the moment, I think he's decided to fight one event at a time. And so the fact that he says, I'm going to go along with this simply signals that I don't have time to deal with it right now. I'm not going to fight this bunch. I'm going to focus on where I am right now in the Middle East. And I think that's what's happening.
And so the question is going to be, where do we go from here? Because and I think that there's some justification. I know Gary's looking to see if we have a specific soundbite, because based on what you just said there, really, I think it really sounds like he's kind of leaning in that direction. But at some point, he's going to have to do something. I mean, I guess you could just keep trying to kick the can down the road. But let me ask it in the form of a question. Can we just kick the can down the road forever and then not worry about it and literally go 2.5 more years for Trump and just let this thing founder? Can we survive that?
Well, I think we can. To be frank with you, in Europe, the deal in Europe for President Trump is as follows. You're dealing with people that are presiding over financial, economic, social, and cultural disasters in their own countries. Most of the leaders who are there at this conference will not last much longer. I'm surprised any of them are still there. When I look at Merz, I'm shocked. When I look at Macron, I can't believe it. And Starmer, insane. So there are going to be major convulsive changes after this G7 across Europe. All you have to do is look at what's happening in Ireland, in Southern Ireland, in Northern Ireland, recently in Glasgow. And you have a news blackout that's being imposed by these globalist leaders that don't want the world to know that inside Germany, inside France, inside the Netherlands, inside Great Britain, there is extreme discontent with what's being done to those societies by this massive immigration problem and the massive mismanagement of finances and the stupidity of trying to cultivate war against Russia. So those things are underway. Now, does President Trump get a briefing on this? Does anybody tell him about that? I don't know. But I think for the reasons that I just said, much of what's wrong in Europe is going to be solved. It's not going to be solved through military force. It's not going to be solved by the Russians or us. It's going to be solved internally in these countries. And the governments that come to power are going to be singularly disinterested in going to war with Germany because their populations with Russia, because their populations don't want to go to war. Aliza Vital has given a couple of really excellent speeches. Whether or not she ever emerges to lead that country, I don't know, and we'll see. But she has pointed the way. and she is the beginning of the change, not just in Germany, but I think across Europe, where she is saying, look, as soon as we have power in Berlin, we're going to Russia. And we're going to work out new arrangements. We want to import energy. We want to end the deindustrialization of Germany. We want to put people back to work. And we're going to tackle this ugly, difficult issue of rounding up millions of people that don't belong in this country, who should never have been admitted, and sending them home. These are the things that she's saying, because they've got to restore the rule of law in Germany. Now, you and I lived in Germany. I've spent almost 8 years of my life living off and on in Germany. That's a country where until 2015, even earlier than that, you never had to worry about the rule of law. I mean, you had policemen that could never be bribed. They wouldn't even think about it. There was no corruption, and the enforcement of the law was immediate, uniform, just, and effective. That's changed, and they've got to get that back. They know that. So I think Europe is poised for revolutionary change on the scale of 1848, and that's going to solve some of these problems. When I say some of them, I'm talking about the problem of war with Russia. That's going to go away, absolutely go away. And when that happens, Zelensky's funds dry up and Zelensky has no support. He'll find an aircraft, I'm sure, and fly somewhere fast to get out of town. He'll look like our friends in Kabul at the end, believe me. And he has no support in Western Ukraine. The people there are sick of it. You've seen the photographs. You've seen the video footage. People don't want anything to do with this war. And he's trying to push the Europeans to send Ukrainians that are overseas, men, young single men, back to fight. Well, I think they'd like to push a lot of these young single Ukrainians out so they can open up jobs for their own people. But I don't think they're going to send Ukrainians to die pointlessly in eastern Ukraine in a war with Russia that Ukraine has no chance of winning. I think President Trump gets that, but again, why should he wrap himself around the telephone pole at this point over that? He's got problems in the Middle East he's got to solve, and I think he's going to try that first.
Yeah, well, we certainly wish him well on that front as well. Interesting. So President Trump apparently on the margins of the G7 met briefly with Zelensky. Who knows what he said? We'll have to wait and see. But here's what he said a couple of days ago on the Ukraine situation.
Are you going to have a special focus on Ukraine?
Well, we're going to look. Now we were focused on Iran. That's going to be in the rear view mirror. But look, we have nothing to do with it. We sell weapons to them. We don't even give them. Obama gave them $350 billion worth of what which was crazy. The European Union pays us full price for weapons. But it's not that. It's that it has no impact on us other than we sell weapons. We're thousands of miles away.
Gary had one from today. That's not from a couple of days ago.
No.
That's from today.
Here's the problem. Here's the problem. Woodrow Wilson opened his credit markets to France and Great Britain, and he also opened them to Germany. But he knew during World War I that the Germans were not going to be able to get out of Germany and come to the United States to gain access to credit from us. And so what did he do? He effectively aligned us early on with the British and the French in their war with Germany. That was dishonest and it was destructive, because within 6 months, France and Great Britain were running out of money. The French president in 1914, when he was asked after the war began, how long will this last? He said, well, 6 to 8 months. After that, there is no money. Well, we made up the deficit. So we kept the First World War going and we profited from it, exactly as President Trump is talking about it. It's morally reprehensible. It's wrong. And he should not do that. But morally reprehensive acts are pretty commonplace inside the Beltway, and self-enrichment seems to outweigh any moral consideration these days on either side of the aisle. But I think people need to understand that we were instrumental in making this war in 1914 last as long as it did, and ultimately in the complete destruction of Central East Europe as a result. And we know what that meant. It brought communism to power in Russia and eventually National Socialism to power in Berlin. Dumb, stupid, foolish. So he needs to cut it off. And that's what he should do as soon as possible. You talk about how important it is to cut off the Israelis from the funds and the munitions and the weapons that they are using to destroy their neighbors. It's no less important to cut off Ukraine. If you don't do it, eventually the Russians, and I think reality will set in with Europe, but more people will die needlessly.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. I guess the last question, I know we're running low on time, but you can print money, you can build weapons, you can create long-range strikes, etc. You can't print men, though. And every day these Ukrainian folks have died, and God only knows what the actual number. It's clearly in the hundreds of thousands of dead, and who knows how many more wounded. There has to come an expiration point where it won't matter how much money or how many weapons you send over there. Doesn't there come a point where the Ukraine side will just have necessity collapse?
Well, there's so much money to bankroll Zelensky and his inner circle, to pay off people in the Rada and keep the secret police flush with cash and the various oligarchs happy, that quite frankly, the people of Ukraine don't matter in Ukraine. That's the issue. Putin is struggling right now with a great deal of pressure, not just from the Russian populace that wants an end to this, and they certainly do, but from his inner circle to take action. We'll see what happens. Recently, we've had some dramatic strikes that you've reported on by the Russians against Ukraine. And we have a continuous advance along the Russian front. Pokrovsk has fallen. Zaporozhye is in range. Essentially, Novorossiya, which we talked about years ago, is becoming a reality. The question is, how do you end this if you're a Russian? And I think the reality is setting in that if the Europeans are not going to come to their senses, you're going to have to cross the river and go into Kiev. But that's something that they don't want to do. And remember that one of the things that's being uppermost in President Putin's mind is not only he wants to spare lives, he's concerned about sparing Russian lives. He's also tried to spare Ukrainian lives, contrary to what people think. But the other thing that he has to consider is NATO. And you have these maniacs that keep talking about war with Russia. Now, we just had the British defense minister resign his post. And he has talked privately and admitted somewhat publicly the British Defense Department is broke. You know, the British armed forces are in ruins. They have nothing with which to fight. Gosh, what a shocker. Well, take a long, good look at everybody else in Europe. Are the French a little better? Yes. But are the French up to a full-fledged war against Russia? Of course not. And Germany? Come on, don't even go there. They've been running every nationalist in Germany out of the military, and the European populations collectively don't want to draft, and they don't want to fight anywhere. So at the end of the day, I think President Putin will probably decide to take some action. And that will be used against Russia. See, this is the issue, Dan. The Russians could go to Kiev tomorrow. If they do that, people are going to say, see, Putin wants to conquer Eastern Europe. It's complete nonsense. It's never been true. But he may not have any choice, because this criminal regime is not going to go away as long as it has cash, equipment, and support. And by the way, we think they have at least 40 to 50,000 mercenaries on the ground in Ukraine fighting for Ukraine. They can't find enough men who are Ukrainian to fight for Ukraine. And it's astonishing that there could be that many, because the Russians have made it clear if they capture a person who is a mercenary who is not Ukrainian, that person can be executed under Russian law as a terrorist. So it's astonishing to me that this thing continues. It's a meat grinder. It's just a blood-absorbing sponge that makes no sense. And I'm saddened by Donald Trump's readiness to just sign off on more stupidity for Ukraine. I'm saddened by the people on the Hill that run around with these little flags on their lapels without understanding what they're doing and what the consequences are for the people in Ukraine. But that's the way it is.
It is. Do you have time for one more question?
One more. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. This is what Hex has said about how, in terms of how long can we go? This is what Hex has said about our ammunition stockpiles. Don't even worry about it.
We're supercharging our arsenal of freedom, building more, building faster, opening up the Pentagon, ripping through the Pentagon bureaucracy to force industry to move faster. So,
but there
our
crisis,
stockpiles
there is
are
a crisis
strong,
with
and they will
those
only get
stockpiles
stronger
right
in the future.
now. There is a crisis with those stockpiles right now in private industry.
That is a manufactured story that the media wants to peddle, and ultimately our stockpiles.
Okay, Gary, that's long enough.
Great,
he said there's no crisis, Doug. He said there's no crisis. We can just keep going. Is he telling the truth?
In his mind, I think he feels obligated as the Secretary of War to tell everybody, don't worry, everything's just fine. There is no crisis. In truth, you've got to look at the whole range of missions and equipment and munitions and weapons. And you begin to see that we are reaching a point now where it is not in our interest to delve deeply into those stockpiles. We've already exhausted many, well, let's put it this way. We've exhausted depth in our capabilities, in our stockpiles. It's not the end of the world, but it's dangerous. I mean, if you take the position that we might have to fight a major high-end conventional war, yes, we're not sufficiently stocked. And keep in mind, we have not mobilized the country, and there's no reason to. Remember when they started talking about Russia early on, well, the Russians are going to run out of this or that or next week. And, 2 months from now, the Russians will have nothing left. Well, Putin mobilized industry. He went short of total mobilization, but he had partial mobilization. We haven't done that. Could we do that? Sure, we could. Do we need to? No, we don't. So I probably would not have said things the way he did, which is, don't look here. There's no problem. We're golden. We're fine. We're the arsenal of freedom. Okay, thanks. Thanks, coach. We'll go on to the football team and do the best we can. But, we need less hyperbole in Washington, Dan. We need the facts, but we also need a balanced assessment. And the best balanced assessment I can give is, are we at critical levels in some areas? Yes. Can we rectify that? Yes. Are we doing something to address it? Yes. Next question. That would be enough. We don't need the cheerleading speech.
And apparently that's all we're going to get. But then that's also all the time we have today. Thank you for going a little bit overtime with us, Doug. Always much appreciated.
Okay, thank you.
There, people can see the more of Doug on his Substack, where he publishes stuff at MacGregorWarrior.substack.com. Thank you very much, Doug.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And we appreciate you guys too. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done that on the way out. And we'll keep you informed of anything else that breaks, whether it's in the Iran situation or the Russia-Ukraine war. And we'll see you next on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. I don't try to talk you into buying gold or tell you how to run your stock portfolio, but there is a way you can help us. Subscribe, hit that like button, and share this with somebody you love.